Hi, I'm Tim Dianasopoulos here in the LI studios on this kind of stormy October day with Jack Hunter, who's our esteemed guest. Just spoke at our Wednesday Wake Up with Conservatism breakfast. And, he just talked about constitutional conservatism with us in a webinar and kind of talked with some other folks at LI. And we just have him here in studio today kind of to discuss what the liberty movement is and who's involved and what comes next. So, Jack, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you're working for now. I think you've just had a job change recently.
Well, I've always got 10 jobs at one time. I am a conservative pundit. I'm running my mouth in some fashion on videos or writing columns at the American Conservative. I do work for Senator Rand Paul. Of course, I worked for his father, Congressman Ron Paul, during the presidential campaign. But I'm in the mix. I stay busy.
Cool. All right, great. Well, today you talked sort of about the liberty movement. Your webinar was about the future of constitutional conservatism. There's a bunch of different names floating around out there. Could you just give us a brief overview? What is this loosely defined sort of liberty movement, and what are its main principles?
Well, the liberty movement was obviously inspired by Ron Paul when he ran for president in 2008 and this time around, and it represents a lot of people who weren't even, there's conservatives. I think some people from the left have sort of seen the light and rejected collectivism and came in that direction. I think that there are a lot of people who just didn't even pay attention to politics. There was a famous sign in 2008, Dr. Paul cured my apathy. And that's sort of that great unwashed out there, the great middle that everybody wants, those independents that really are just sort of fed up with the status quo. And I guess Dr. Paul, he spoke to these people and inspired them. The liberty movement itself is, I think, probably one of the most transformative and revolutionary forces in American politics right now, in the sense that you sort of have a left and right that accept the status quo. What we're seeing even with Romney and Obama is, they don't really disagree on much at the end of the day. Do I want to see Obama in there another 4 years? Absolutely not. But, Romney, could learn a few things from guys like Ron Paul or Rand Paul or Senator Jim DeMint from my state. To me, people, conservatives who've always got it, know we need to go in the opposite direction as far as getting rid of our debt and reducing the size of government.
Yeah. Why do you think so many young people are attracted to the liberty movement? It is very youthful, which a lot of other conservatives, I think, are pretty encouraged by. Why do young people like this so much?
Well, older critics might say, well, they're just, idealistic and they don't know any better. And I actually think that those older critics, while that might be true, and that's generally true of young people in general, they're absolutely wrong. I think the young people don't have the same attachments to the state, to what we call big government, in sort of a loose term, that many of their parents and grandparents do. And I always use the example of entitlements. I'm in my 30s. I don't expect to see Social Security, Medicare. We don't have money for it now, much less than 30 years from now. So somebody that's 18 or 25, like really, they just know. They can see a world in which, America's military is not scattered across the globe, and we call that national defense, to our own financial detriment back home. It's not that they don't believe in a strong national defense. They all do. It's that they don't believe in an irrational offense, which is what we too often have today, that, you can't change the world at the point of a gun when the world doesn't want to be changed and when you can't afford it on top of it. It just doesn't work. We need to defend ourselves and our interests around the world and remain dominant in the world. But you can do it at much less cost in a much more prudent way than what we're doing now. And the young people realize that.
Yeah. So, sort of the segue from that, I was going to bring this up a little later, but our last speaker, Donald Rumsfeld, who we interviewed, kind of critiqued the libertarian view of foreign policy. What would you say to that then? Is he was kind of said it was a little bit naive and.
Well, I think he, with all due respect to Mr. Rumsfeld, I think he's absolutely naive. I think he represents what I consider a liberal foreign policy view. I think liberalism is naive. I think in our domestic policy, the idea that we can spend this money, we could change human nature, that people who don't want to work are going to want to work because we throw money at them, doesn't work. Well, that applies to our foreign policy as well. Mr. Rumsfeld represented a foreign policy when he worked for President Bush that not only thought that, George Will and Bill Buckley had a great exchange about this right before Bill Buckley died. George Will asked Bill Buckley, we have a policy now, the Bush Doctrine, the idea that America can change the world, that it knows how, that this is Wilsonian. Is this conservative, Bill Buckley? He asked him, and Bill Buckley said, no, this is not conservative. So would Donald Rumsfeld say that Bill Buckley and George Will were naive in their understanding? And this is not exclusively libertarian. Those men are not libertarians. I'm a huge fan of Russell Kirk and Richard Weaver, sort of the foundations of National Review in the 50s and 60s. Both of their foreign policy views are far closer to what a Ron Paul or a Rand Paul believe than what Donald Rumsfeld believes. That sort of neoconservative view, that hawkish view, that is really liberalism passed off as conservatism, is horribly, horribly naive. We see it with Obama's policy in Libya, giving these people weapons and guns. Well, how did that turn out for some of our diplomats? Most of the world, much of the world, especially that part of the world, you can't give them democracy. People have to fight for democracy themselves, or freedom.
Develop it. Yeah.
Right, develop it. You can't do it. And to our own detriment, we involve ourselves there financially, militarily, and it hurts us. It damages us. And to keep doing it time and again, who's being naive?
Yeah.
Somebody with my perspective, or somebody who thinks that's a good idea for infinity?
All right. Yeah, kind of to play off that too, one of my next questions was, you've always described yourself as a conservative. There are a lot of libertarians I've seen that, are involved in this type of movement. Where within the conservative movement do you think the liberty, movement sort of fits in?
I think, and I mentioned this in my talk earlier, that Reagan's three-legged stool, to restoring that, is essential. And people who aren't familiar, Ronald Reagan considered American conservatism a three-legged stool, those three legs being national security conservatism, faith-based or religious conservatives, and what he called economic/libertarian conservatives. If one of those legs does not exist, conservatism cannot exist. This idea that libertarianism is something separate and unique and different or antithetical even to conservatism is something very new and is usually espoused by people who don't know a damn thing about their own movement, quite frankly. When you see people like Senator Rick Santorum say, I fight very strongly against libertarian influence within the conservative movement, the Republican Party, well, boy, that sure would have shocked Barry Goldwater, who thought that extremism or Robert Taft, but Goldwater, who thought that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Well, how extreme are we going to get? Barry Goldwater thought we should go all the way. Senator Santorum disagrees. Do you disagree with Ronald Reagan, who said in 1976 that the heart and soul of conservatism is libertarianism? I think Reagan got it right. I think Goldwater got it right. And I think that Rick Santorum, and if we could go back a little bit, Donald Rumsfeld get it wrong.
Okay. This thing sort of started out, I would say, almost 8 years ago now, kind of thinking back with the rumblings of Ron Paul, is he going to go for the presidency? And then he starts this up. How do you think it's matured since it first started out?
I think it's actually matured a lot. I have so many friends and people I admire and care about in this movement, and being a part of this movement. We were all inspired by Congressman Paul and the example he set, being Dr. No, the one no vote for so many years up there, standing by the Constitution. But I think it's been an education for a lot of us too. What's possible in practical politics, how to be practical in getting there. And also, for some of the more radicals amongst us, they need to stay radical. The key to doing this is to have the people who are willing to get down in the dirt and work through the mechanisms of practical politics, and also those people on the outside that keep them honest. You need both, and they're both vitally important.
You're too good at this, Jack. You just stole my next question. I was going to ask, this has come quite a long way. What do you do with your radicals, once a movement sort of takes hold? And you said we should still keep them around. I know there's a lot of critiques going around, but don't they complement each other? I mean,
my rule as it relates to the liberty movement to which I belong is I support anybody who's doing what they're passionate about, what they care about, even if it's not necessarily my cup of tea, so long as they're not hurting things. If I think you're hurting our efforts, I will speak out against it. If I think you make the movement look bad, I will speak out against it, and vociferously so. As far as radicalism itself, not only do I embrace certain aspects of it, that's always been there. One of Bill Buckley's earliest influences was Albert J. Nock, who was a libertarian thinker who by the end of his life had declared himself an anarchist. He was a friend of the Buckley family. If you read George H. Nash's The Conservative Intellectual Movement in America since 1945, he emphasizes that one of the earliest influence on the founder of National Review was this anarchist, Albert J. Nock. Carl Hess, who was a speechwriter for Barry Goldwater, was a radical gentleman. This is nothing new, and we sort of need those people, and they sort of remind us of all sorts of important things on occasion.
Even ISI, I believe, started out as this intercollegiate society for individuals.
Individuals. Nobody used the term before Russell Kirk in 1953 with the conservative mind. He popularized the term. Bill Buckley, a guided man in Yale, called himself an individualist. People were, many called themselves libertarians. Conservatism as a term popular in the United States is newer than libertarianism.
Yeah, it's kind of curious. I mean, I think Buckley started off in a more radical place than he ended up, except for maybe the last 5 years of his life.
I think he went back to.
He went back. He seemed like he had an entire cycle.
Nobody's perfect, but he set so many great examples we could learn from.
Yeah, no, definitely. This is sort of for lack of a better phrase, the end of the Ron Paul era within the liberty movement. He's stepping down.
Says
from
you,
public life.
but
Well, I mean, he's obviously going to take a less formal role. Who are the next leaders within this? Who's going to step up to the plate?
well, first and foremost, there will never be another Ron Paul. He's a unique individual, and what he's accomplished is something I think that'll go down in the annals of history as without compare.
Yeah.
It just will. As far as people who are going to take the torch, take the movement he inspired and carry it forward, obviously there's his son, Senator Rand Paul. I have all the admiration in the world for Representative Justin Amash. I think Thomas Massey in Kentucky, who will probably win his race in this election cycle, is fantastic. People like Ted Cruz, Senator Jim DeMint from my own home state, who's been extremely friendly on liberty issues in particular. There's people out there that we don't even know exist that will come about in 2 years and 4 years, and it's all going to be due to the example and inspiration that Ron Paul provided from his son on down. They're going to be there, and we're going to take back this country, revolutionize our politics.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of curious. When I first met Rand, he was a guy in a T-shirt phone banking, up in New Hampshire, and now he's a United States Senator. Of course, he was a doctor and an esteemed individual in and of himself, but now he's making big decisions in this country. Do you also think that there could be an issue in the fact that maybe you're hitting a wall in the sense you're getting your guys elected, you're maybe winning on some policy issues, but it's hard to take that next step to, the presidency or getting a Supreme Court justice?
It's not going to be easy, but that is a worthwhile goal, and it's an attainable goal. The difference between libertarian philosophy in the United States before and after Ron Paul is before it was primarily an educational effort, and that's important. If you're going to advance politically, you need to have principles behind it, and that requires education. Now, thanks to Ron Paul, we have the opportunity to advance politically. People have this argument, it should be education or activism, education or politics. Education's always been there. That's nothing new, and it needs to keep happening, and there's a place for it, a big place for it. But the idea that we can make this, what we've learned about all these years, reality is brand new in the last 4 years or so. That's thanks to Congressman Paul. And yeah, I could see a president that comes out of our movement. I could see a Supreme Court justice, more congressmen and senators. It's happened already, and will continue to happen.
Well, that's always been interesting. All right, we'll keep it quick here. One final question. If your life depended on it and you could do one of two things that day, spend the entire day hanging out with Ron Paul down at Texas at his ranch, surfing, or in a wrestling match versus Ric Flair, what would you take?
Well, I wouldn't want to get beat up by Ric Flair, and I've met both gentlemen. And,
You could be a Monday Night Raw.
That's such a tough question. Can I invite Ron Paul with me? He might not want to come to the wrestling match. No.
It might violate the non-aggression principle. I don't know.
It might. I think my first loyalties would always be to Dr. Paul.
All right, great. All right, well, Jack, thanks a lot for coming here. Really appreciated having you, and some great answers to a lot of questions that I think are going to come up. And you're welcome back here anytime. Really appreciate it.
Thanks
a lot.
Glad to be here.